Damaged Defenders by Sherza. Chapter 46. Frigga and Bylister. Part 2. This Frigga knew was going to get interesting very, very quickly. Because unlike her husband, Frigga intended to be honest and upfront with Bylister, and she was realist enough to know that there was going to be a bit of yelling at the very least in the near future. I do not know, Frigga began, the cause of the start of the rift between the Aesir and the Jotuns. That was before my time, before your parents' time. We have both heard tales as to the cause, but given those tales were told to us by one side only, I sincerely doubt either of us heard an unprejudiced account of those days. Whatever the cause was, it is far and beyond too late for either of us to do anything about it, and if we are to have any chance at all at peace between us, it seems wisest to put such ancient, half-forgotten issues completely in the past. She sighed. That does not, however, wipe the slate clean entirely. Whatever the original cause, things escalated to open war. Odin and Alfie bear the burden of guilt for that, for continuing and escalating a situation begun by their parents, an escalation that culminated in the confrontation on Midgard a millennium ago. I fear, at that point, the burden of shame is borne entirely by Odin, and by Asgard after him. Ensuring a defeated aggressor cannot rise up in rebellion is the right of any conqueror. Condemning a defeated aggressor to a slow, painful death by starvation is the act of a cruel despot. Unfortunately, after so many millennia of war, none on Asgard were willing to see Odin as such, and all my remonstrances to act with compassion were ignored. And to attempt to remove Odin from the throne then would have seen me dead. The general populace saw him as their conquering hero, and would never have stood for him being forced from the throne, especially not by his but newly crowned queen from another realm. She had been Odin's bride for less than half a century when Odin forced Laufey into defeat, a complete stranger to her new people, and one they would not heed. Not yet. Not then, and certainly not in preference to Odin. She'd needed time to build herself a reputation amongst the Aesir as someone to turn to, someone they could trust in times of trouble, someone with a cool head, keen intellect, and a reputation for fairly abdicating any matter brought to her, regardless of any person's ancestry, sex, or vocation, a contrast to Odin's frequently capricious moods, harsh judgments, aloof removal from his people, and distinctly prejudicial views as regarding women, the poor, and anyone not pure Aesir by birth. It had taken time, but slowly the people had come to know her, to listen to her when she spoke, to turn to her more and more to settle disputes, weary of Odin's heavy-handedness. Unfortunately, by the time she'd had the reputation she'd needed to bring Odin down off his throne without causing a civil war, there was nothing obviously wrong going on that she could use as an excuse to do so. It had taken exiling Thor and Loki's fall to bring them to that pass. Unfortunately, removing the casket from your realm was but the first of Odin's mistakes, Frigga said, silently bracing herself. One hand, resting on the tabletop, curled just slightly, ready to start flinging spells if it became necessary. For the casket was not all that Odin removed from this realm. He returned to Asgard with another prize as well, or what he thought to be a prize. A Jotun babe, small, and, so he claimed, left to die. One last deep breath, and then she said it. A babe bearing the marks of the royal line of Jotunheim. Bylister listened quietly as Frigga began to talk. Privately, Bylister agreed that they'd be best saved, if any attempt at peace between them was to succeed, in burying the ancient history that neither of them had been alive to experience. It hardly mattered at this late date how things had gotten started. What mattered was patching the damage done since then. Bylister was also willing to admit that Queen Frigga had a really good and legitimate excuse for not kicking Odin's ass right from the get-go. Attempting to depose the hero king of the Golden Realm would have been literal suicide 1,000 years ago. All that could have been done would be to wait for Odin to screw up badly enough for the people to be willing to rebel, or to do as Frigga had apparently done. Build a reputation as a better sovereign than Odin and wait for an opportunity to take over with minimal, if any, bloodshed among the Aesir. Frigga's final words, however, knocked such thoughts straight out of Bylaster's head. It took a couple seconds for the import of what Frigga had admitted to really sink in, whereupon it took a bit for Bylaster to really digest what had been said. Bylaster had always known they were not in actuality the youngest of Laufey and Farbati's children. The youngest, however, had largely been a forbidden subject, spoken of rarely and with grief and rage apparent in near equal parts when the subject did come up. Bylaster was young enough when the third child was born that they had no memory of the child. All Bylaster's knowledge of the youngest came from Farbati or Helblindi. Laufey had refused to speak of the child at all. Bylaster knew that the child had been born small, and that their parents feared for the child's survival, so much so that they had even neglected to name the child, reluctant to attach themselves to a child that might fall prey to Jotunheim's less than welcoming environs before it could even become mobile. They had taken the child to the temple for the priests to watch over in Sucor until it was certain whether the child would survive or not. Bylaster also knew that in the wake of Odin's rampage on Jotunheim, the priests had been found dead. The child had not been found at all. Given the dead priests and the amount of blood shed in the temple, Bylaster's parents had both presumed that the defenseless infant had been slaughtered. Whether by Aesir or by wildlife mattered little to either of them. The body, they assumed, had been consumed or carried off by one of the realm's many predators before the area had been cleared out and the dead priests found during the cleanup efforts. Certainly the realm's predators had been all over the ravaged city, taking advantage of the lack of warriors and the overabundance of available meat in the form of the dead. Apparently that had not been the case. As realization set in, it took every ounce of Bylaster's control to refrain from attacking the Aesir or calling on their fellows to do it. Actually, their people helped Bylaster get under control because as those present realized what Frigga had admitted to, they began to react rather negatively, to put it mildly. Bylaster gave vent to some small portion of their temper by snarling at the others, ruthlessly ordering them to stillness and silence in their own tongue. That this resulted in a number of vocalizations that the Aesir would feel rather than hear, and which, if their reactions were anything to go by count, a couple of them helped restore some semblance of control and calm to Bylaster. Fortunately, despite their outrage, none of the warriors were willing to disobey him, so the Aesir were not attacked. At least not yet. Where are they? Bylaster snarled at Frigga.
Currently on Midgard,
Frigga admitted. She alone seemed to not have been affected by the reaction to her news. The rest of the Aesir were clutching at their weapons and eyeing the surrounding Jotuns, though it was entirely possible that Frigga was as ready to defend as the others. Frigga was, after all, Vanir by birth and renowned for her magical skills.
He was raised as a prince of Asgard,
Frigga went on.
Only Odin, myself, and Heimdall knew for certain of his true heritage, though I imagine a few others figured it out if they sat down to think about it.
And Bylaster knew the name given to this child.
Loki,
he growled.
You speak of Loki Silvertongue, the trickster.
He scowled at Frigga. What has Odin child thief done to my sibling that he is gone dead to Midgard? Well, that had gone over better than Frigga had feared, although she knew the worst wasn't over yet.
He is not condemned there, Bylaster. He is there by his choice, she said, though I am sorry to say that he is not without harm done to him by Odin, despite my best attempts otherwise.
She could feel at least one of the warriors three fighting the urge to defend Odin. Sif, who had been exposed to Odin pulling something extremely questionable, was grim-faced and silent beside her and not the source of the tension.
Loki was bespelled to appear Aesir,
Frigga admitted.
But Odin never stilled the tongues of those that spoke ill of Jotuns, nor was any allowance made for the fact that despite appearing Aesir, Loki was of a different realm and thus would never be Aesir, no matter how hard he tried.
She held up a hand when Bilistair visibly and literally bristled, actually growing little ice spikes so that he ended up resembling a Midgardian creature called a hedgehog.
Peace, Bilistair. I do not mean that as an insult. I mean it in the sense that those born to each realm have different gifts. The elves are masters of magic, the dwarves masters of mining and crafting, and so on. To expect a resident of any realm to match the residents of another realm in their skills is folly.
Bilistair relaxed a bit.
Loki was not without aid, Frigga said. I raised him and love him as if he were my own son. I taught him such magic as he was ready to learn as he grew. I taught him statecraft. Thor loves him dearly.
What went wrong? Bilistair may have relaxed marginally, but it was clear from his tone that he was still extremely angry. Not that Frigga blamed him a bit.
Loki found out the truth of his parentage,
Frigga admitted.
after a millennium of hearing naught but ill of Jotuns from virtually everyone around him.
It was, of course, a bit more involved than that, but then him and the bulk of the problem at the time.
Things did not go very well from there. He has regained some equilibrium at this point, found people who know little to nothing of the Aesir or Jotuns on Midgard, and joined their company, though I fear it will take time before he truly accepts the truth.
It was taking every ounce of Bilistair's control to not howl in rage. What in the name of all the hells that ever were had been done to his sibling? Bilistair was intelligent enough to know that Frigga wasn't telling the whole story, nor should Frigga tell it all just now, as Bilistair wasn't sure they'd be able to refrain from killing Frigga and their company, regardless of the fact it would restart the Aesir-Jotun war with a vengeance. Bilistair shoved to his feet and started to pace, growling angrily. Bilistair wanted to go to Midgard right then and steal his sibling away, but if Loki had been raised to loathe his own people, that would not go over well. Not to mention the fact that Loki was renowned throughout the realms as second only to Frigga herself in magical skills. He was second to none when it came to cunning, scheming, and manipulation. Crossing such a one could only ever end in tears and pain for everyone involved that wasn't named Loki. Bilistair would be far more likely to end up signing over their rights to their firstborn or something of the sort than getting Loki to come to Jotunheim to live. Bilistair paced for a good 5 minutes before they managed to calm down enough to talk rather than scream, demand, or physically attack. You will remain here. I will send for my sibling and my parent, and you will inform them of this. At that point, it will be up to Forbati to decide what is to be done, as it is their child that was stolen and only my sibling. Bilistair whirled towards their warriors and called for a half dozen of the most even-tempered, and thus least likely to raise weapons to the Aesir despite the circumstances. Take them to the southwest caves. A swarm is there. Guard them and do not permit them to wander. That last command being more for the Aesir's safety than anything else. Bilistair wouldn't put it past about half of the assembled warriors to try to attack the Aesir. Heck, Bilistair wouldn't put it past himself to do so. He pointed to two long-legged youths. You, take one of the beasts each and make haste to Forbati and Helblindi strongholds. Inform them their presence is required with all haste and why. The two youths bolted out of the room and Bilistair turned towards the Aesir. These 6 will escort you to the rooms you will use during your stay. I must request that you do not wander beyond that corridor. Not only would you risk becoming lost in the depths of the caves, but your safety could not be ensured. Frigga, to their credit, accepted the situation with a calm, regal nod. The other 4 were nowhere near as calm or happy, and looked to be having great difficulty keeping their tongues behind their teeth. Whatever force it was that convinced them to remain silent, Bilistair was grateful. It was lessening the chances of disaster striking.